What if I told you there are books in the Bible that were never read because they were too powerful to be allowed? Would you believe me? The temple bell ought have fallen silent. The gates of Jerusalem, once sacred, now hang heavy with the smoke of a desecrated altar. A foreign king placed an idol where incense once rose to the God of our fathers. And then someone rose, not with an army, but with a single blade and a faith that would not bend. Some uprisings begin with a shout. The Maccabean revolt began with a whisper. We would rather die than betray the covenant of our ancestors. This is not a story of war. This is a rite of devotion. A place where mothers watched their children die and still looked to heaven with unbroken eyes. A place where God sent angels on horseback, their reins made of gold, into the heart of the battle. You have not heard this story, because those who wrote it down were silenced. But tonight we open the forbidden book, and we speak it aloud, with blood and with faith. The wind in Jerusalem blew backward against the crumbling walls now beneath foreign feet. The ground cracked, not from time, but from a temple defiled. The altar, once steeped in morning incense, now reeked of unclean flesh, and in the center of the sacred square, where ancestors once stood tall to recite the law, a pagan official held up a slab of pork like it was a trophy of conquest. "Offer it," he said, his Hebrew twisted and sharp. "Just one bite of meat, and you'll be spared." No one moved. Behind him, Greek soldiers tightened their grip on spears. The elders whispered prayers, as if God might still be listening. Children hid in their mothers' robes, trembling like late-season grass, and the men their foreheads bowed not in humility, but in fury too full to speak. From the crowd, a figure emerged, an old man whose eyes had seen Jerusalem besieged not once, but twice, a priest of the house of Levi Mattathias. The official saw him, smiled, like a snake shedding skin. "You're a man of standing," he said. "If you go first, the rest will follow. You'll be given honor. Gold, a seat at the table, just one bite is all it takes." Mattathias said nothing. His hand rested over his robe, just above the hidden tablets of Moses' law carried always like a sacred bone. His eyes scanned the villagers, those who had once gathered to hear him teach, once knelt behind him in prayer, once wept before a law now torn. Then he looked straight into the eyes of the man holding pork. "If the whole world bows to you," he said, his voice soft but sharp enough to stop the wind, "my house and I will serve only the God of our fathers." The official smirked, drew his sword. But the old man was faster. One stroke, clean. Blood splashed across the altar, not the blood of sacrifice, but of desecration silenced. And in that moment, for the first time in years, the altar of the Lord was stained, as it should be. Jerusalem erupted. Screams, shouts, soldiers. The crowd shattered like waves on stone, but Mattathias did not flee. He turned, looked to his 5 sons, and cried out, "Whoever loves the law of the Lord, follow me." The cry rang out like a ram's horn blown from Sinai, not a call to rebellion, but a call to awaken the cry of a faith pushed to the edge. They fled to the mountains, where prophets once hid, where exiles once wrote revelation in blood. There, they began again not building temples of stone, but an army of flesh and fire and faith. Soon the purges came. Seleucid soldiers went village by village. Those who refused to worship foreign gods were dragged to the marketplace and slain where they stood. Mothers who bore sons, if they would not submit them to pagan rites, were hanged with their children upside down on the village gates. Across Judea, smoke rose from shattered homes, from broken altars, from hearts burning with loyalty too costly to betray. Mattathias fell ill. He knew his time was short, on a stone bed. He summoned his 5 sons. His face cracked like dry earth, but his voice rumbled like thunder in a drought. "My sons," he said, "remember Phinehas who struck down the sinner in the camp. Remember David who felled Goliath with a single stone. Remember Daniel who would not eat the king's meat. The Lord does not need many. He needs the faithful." From beneath his pillow, he drew an old sword iron rusted, but its edge as sharp as the law. He placed it in the hands of Judah, his 3rd son, whose eyes burned like flame, whose arms once carried the youngest, now held the blade of defiance. His name was Judah, but the world would call him Maccabee the Hammer, not for crushing skulls, but for striking against forgetting, for striking against fear, for striking the silence that had nearly erased a people. He had no cavalry, no treasury, no protection but a handful of farmers, a few scribes, and God. Before each battle, Judah commanded them to kneel, hands over their hearts, as their father had done. "We don't fight for land. We don't die for glory. We live, and if we must, we die for the temple, for the children forced to eat forbidden meat, for the promise made to Abraham. And if the Lord still hears us, then let him answer." Their first battle came by night. The enemy was tenfold in number. The Seleucids laughed, saw only rebels, lepers, dust. The enemy camp blazed with light. War drums shook the earth. But by dawn, the camp was ash. Survivors spoke of a strange wind, of fire rising from places untouched, of trumpet blasts from nowhere, and they swore Judah's men never touched the front lines, because the Lord had fought before they lifted a hand. Judah wasn't surprised. He bowed his head and said to the living, "The Lord has begun to answer." The name Judah Maccabee spread like flame through dry grass. Villagers left their homes to find him in the hills. Children once trembling before idols now hurled stones at foreign altars. In the Seleucid palace, Antiochus IV shattered his wine cup, screamed, "Kill them all! No mercy! Extinguish that faith before it becomes a fire that cannot be quenched!" But it was too late. A sword had been drawn, a vow had been carved into stone, and a faith rekindled with blood, with tears, and with names still remembered by angels. The night before the great battle. A crescent moon hung in the sky, thin as a blade. The grass was damp with the sweat of soldiers, and the earth exhaled the rust scent of iron and fear. Judah did not sleep. He knelt, head bowed against a jagged stone, once an altar for his wandering ancestors. "You see them, don't you?" His voice cracked like dry rock. "They're as many as grains of sand. They have weapons, war elephants, armor, mercenaries from lands we've never set foot in. And us, we have only your word." No voice answered, only leaves trembling in the wind, and thunder distant, without rain. A child soldier ran up, whispering. "They're moving toward Beth Zur, 15,000 men, 33 elephants, 10 iron chariots. They'll be here by sunrise." Judah stood. He didn't look toward the enemy's camp. He looked up, and for the first time, a quiet smile touched the lips of a man who had forgotten what ease felt like. "Then tomorrow," he whispered, "God will have work to do." At first light, when the sun sliced across the hills of Beth Zur, where the battlefield stretched like the open mouth of a serpent, the Seleucid army stood in perfect formation. Elephants bellowed until the ground shook. Brass horns blared, calling upon foreign gods. At the front, riding high on the lead elephant, sat General Nicanor, his armor etched with Zeus, his spear longer than a man's body. Across the field, Judah had no elephants, no horns, no chariots, only people worn, weary, hands trembling, but eyes burning. Ash from the old altar was smeared across their foreheads as a sign so that when they fell, the earth would know who they were. Judah climbed a rock. His voice didn't roar. It seeped like water into cracked ground. "Brothers, do not look at their numbers. Do not look at their weapons. Look up. Look to the sky, where our fathers are watching. Remember, God does not need a mighty army. He needs the faithful." They say that as Judah spoke. A wind blew back not toward them, but toward the Seleucids, and in it, the scent of burning sandalwood. No one knew where it came from. Then the battle began. They surged forward, not in perfect lines like their enemies, but like thunder, like a century of rage finally given voice. Flames leapt from their torches into the enemy camp. Arrows rained, still. Judah's men pressed on. And when the tide began to turn, when Judah stood nearly surrounded by 4 mounted warriors, it happened. From the east, where the sun had just begun to rise, 5 riders appeared. No one knew who they were, their horses white as Dead Sea salt, golden reins, armor untouched by dust. From their hands poured light like blades of flame. They didn't need steeds. They didn't touch the ground. Every time one raised a hand, lightning tore through the Seleucid ranks at every cry. Elephants bucked. Soldiers fell. The enemy panicked. One soldier screamed, "What god have you summoned who stands with you?" Judah said nothing, because just then, one of the 5 riders slowed, dismounted, and walked toward him. He did not speak. He only held out a sword, a golden blade. So bright its shadow reflected Judah's face. The hand touched his shoulder, and a voice rose from beyond the ancestral grave. "Take it. This is the holy sword. With it, you will shatter the wicked and guard the covenant." This was no dream. The others saw it too. The man was Jeremiah the prophet of old, returned to deliver heaven's final weapon. From that moment, Judah changed. He fought like fire. Wherever he moved, enemies fled, elephants screamed, the ground turned red. And no Seleucid soldier cried out to Zeus again. They shouted only one word, Eloah, the ancient name of the living God. When the battle ended, the grass at Beth Zur was red down to its roots, but not a single man in Judah's army had died. Only one had been wounded, a father who had thrown himself in front of a spear to save his son. That boy would later say, "I saw light around my father. I thought, it was God shielding him." News of the victory arrived before any messenger reached the villages. People who had once fled in fear returned. Not with swords, but with Bibles hidden in stone walls, with carved tablets unearthed from the soil, with tears because they never believed they would live to see Jerusalem rise again. But in the crowd that sang, one woman did not raise her voice. She wore rough cloth, a black shawl, and eyes deep as a forgotten well. No one knew her name, only that her sorrow outweighed that of a nation. She was the mother of 7 sons, and she would be the soul of the next chapter, where faith survives even death. Some chapters in Scripture were never written in ink. They were written in screams, in tears swallowed whole, in the sound of bones breaking, of skin being torn, and in the silence too deep to name. From a mother with nothing left to give. No one remembers her name. The Bible does not record it. History passed her by. She is known only as the mother of 7 sons. But in places where the scriptures were never erased in the mouths of Ethiopian priests who pass the word by breath alone, she is called something else, the one who gave birth to faith. It began as many executions did in those days. Children, hands bound, marched to the public square of Antioch. Presiding over them was a governor, a servant of Antiochus IV, a man who believed death could break the soul. Before him stood 7 young men, thin, wounded, exhausted. But their eyes did not lower. "Eat," he said, pointing at a steaming piece of pork. "One bite, and you'll be spared." The eldest stepped forward. The governor sneered, "Held out the meat. You don't even have to swallow, just pretend." The young man shook his head. "We were taught from our mother's breast that to eat forbidden meat is to betray the covenant. And if you think death will make us afraid, you know nothing of the living God." The words cut like a blade turned inward. The governor signaled. The iron mallet came down on his hand, then his shoulder, his knees, his chest. He did not scream. He looked at his mother and nodded. She did not cry. She placed her hand over her heart, where she once rocked him to sleep, and nodded back. One by one, the other 6 were called. One had his tongue torn out, another, his scalp peeled back, another, his fingertips burned with heated iron. One had his spine snapped, until his face touched the dust. Each one before the final blow looked back at their mother. Each child was a cut into her soul, but each death was also a proclamation, spoken in a square soaked in dread. Then came the youngest, still a boy, eyes wet with milk. The governor laughed, a hiss of serpent joy. "You've lost 6 sons. Will you lose one more? Plead with him. Beg him to eat. Beg him to live." The mother stepped forward. She knelt before her last son. Many thought she would beg. She did not. She whispered, her voice soft as the wind over ancestral graves. "My son, I did not bear you by the hands of a midwife, but by the hand of the living God. It was he who formed you in my womb, who gave you breath and bone. So if you must give it back to him, give it whole. Do not fear death. Trust that the God who made you will restore you on the last day." The boy nodded, no longer afraid, no longer needing to be dragged. He walked like entering a sanctuary. And when his head struck the ground, the mother did not weep. She looked to heaven. Her lips moved. "You have given all. Now may the Lord keep his word. Restore them each one on the morning of eternity." They say she died soon after. Her heart gave out under a grief too large for this world. But others say she saw a light before the end. Not sunlight, but the radiance of her 7 sons standing around the throne of God, clothed in white, crowns on their heads. Her story never made it into the canon. It was labeled Apocrypha, left out, set aside. But to those who still believe, she is living scripture. Because she teaches us this, faith is not what we hold when it's easy, it's what we choose when our blood is being spilled. And every time someone rises in the face of tyranny, refuses to bow, dares to say, "I would rather die than break the covenant," she rises too. In their blood, in their breath, in their bones. Beth Zur was where the sword struck. But the square of Antioch was where faith needed no weapon. 7 children, 1 mother, no blades, no army, no angels. And still they won. Not because they survived, but because their killers could not kill the soul. And from the earth where they fell, a prophecy took root. There will be resurrection, and it will come to those who dare to die for righteousness. Some souls were never meant to live long. They were made to burn brief and blazing like torches God himself lit in the dark night of history. Judah Maccabee was one of them. from the day he gripped the sword his father left behind. Blood was never far. But not meaningless blood. Every strike, every step, every prayer uttered through dust and death was a hammer blow against forgetfulness. He never dreamed of a throne, never built a palace, never claimed a title. There was only one thing Judah fought to reclaim, that Jerusalem belongs to God, and God alone. That winter, a thin snow clung to the peaks of Galilee. The wind carried the scent of rust, blood, and bad news. Demetrius, the new Seleucid king, sent General Bacchides ruthless, seasoned with orders to extinguish the Maccabees at any cost. He came with no idols, no silver bribes, only spears, war horses, and 20,000 elite soldiers. Beside him rode Alcimus, a traitorous priest, a Jew by blood, but now Rome's puppet high priest, his soul sold for a title. Judah knew he was being hunted. His commanders begged him, withdraw, regroup, wait for the right moment. But Judah looked to the sky where the reflection of heaven danced upon the golden sword once given by Jeremiah. "I will not retreat," he said. "The Lord fought with me when we were but 100. He can do it again with 10. If you want to live, leave now. But if you wish to die and make it matter, follow me." 3,000 stayed. Then just 800. The final battle took place at Elasa, a barren hill with no shelter, no escape. Judah stood at the summit, gazing down at an army like a sea spread at his feet. He did not tremble. He never had. But for one breath, he sighed and placed a hand over his chest. Maybe he was thinking of his father on a stone bed, of a younger brother lost in his sleep, of a mother he would never see again. Maybe he knew this was the last time. Bacchides gave the order. Cavalry charged like beasts let loose. Judah didn't run. He ran into them, sword flashing like lightning, fighting not from madness, but from a love too deep to be shaken. They say for 3 full watches of the night, no one could touch him. Horses veered away. Blades shattered on his, as if unseen hands held him from behind. But no hand of man lasts forever. A spear from behind, a sword across the shoulder, an arrow through the gut. Judah fell. The ground beneath him turned red as the setting sun. The soldiers cheered. Bacchides laughed. Alcimus turned his face away. But before his eyes closed, Judah looked up one final time. The clouds swirled above, but in his chest, a fire still burned. And they say in that moment Judah Maccabee smiled, not because he won, but because he did not lose. His body was carried away that night. The survivors held him like a holy relic. They did not speak. They only sang softly an ancient hymn. One man falls, but the people rise. Swords may break, but vows do not. Your blood touched the earth, but your soul was lifted to the sky. Judah died, but after him, his brother Jonathan rose, then Simon, the eldest. The torches passed from hand to hand. The temple was restored. Jerusalem saw sacrifices again for the first time in decades. But everyone knew it all began with a thin young man who held a golden sword and feared nothing. Centuries later, in the mud homes of Ethiopia, Orthodox priests still speak his name like a saint's. They tell it on cold nights to wide-eyed children. There was one who died so that you could read the holy law today. Don't let that death be in vain. And if you listen at midnight in a place with no lights, you may hear it. Hooves in the distance, a battle horn no man is blowing, and a faint, very faint, laughter from a soul that never bowed. After Judah's death, the people of Judea believed the fire would fade. But some flames, once kindled, cannot be put out. The fire of the Maccabees did not burn with wood or oil, but with memory. with blood, and with words spoken just before death. And that fire reached heaven. In the hills of Beth Zur, where angels once descended into the midst of war, villagers claimed to see strange lights at night. Not ordinary fire, not lightning, but glows soft as smoke, warm as a mother's hand, drifting through the forest without a single footstep. A child once said that when he slept at the mountain's base, he dreamed of 7 young men in robes of white, eyes like polished bronze, swords drawn but never swung. They did not speak, they only watched and smiled. Some called it illusion, but those who had lost children, fathers, faith itself in the fires of rebellion they knew. They were the Maccabee martyrs, and they had never slept. When Jonathan rose to lead after Judah, many thought the war had ended, but it was only an interlude, because in that time, ancient prophecies began to stir again, texts buried beneath altars, within cave walls, beneath the earth. And in them, it was written, "Those who die for the law of the Lord shall rise again. Their bones will bud, and God will clothe them in flesh, breathing anew into those who offered themselves for righteousness." These words were not found in the law of Moses, not in the formal prophets, but in a forbidden book, 2 Maccabees. That book spoke not just of winning a war, but of rising again, truly rising in another world, where God himself would welcome them with crowns. This hope had never been declared so clearly. Daniel had hinted at resurrection, a vague glimmer. But in 2 Maccabees, resurrection was no longer a hope. It was a vow, a covenant. The mother of the 7 said it, her sons said it, and now an entire people began to believe it. They no longer saw death as the end. They saw it as a doorway, a narrow gate that led them home. When tortured, they no longer begged for mercy. They said, "You may destroy this body, but my soul belongs to the one who can raise flesh and blood with a single word." That sentence would one day form the foundation for the words of Jesus. "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." John 11:25. One night, Jonathan was sleeping when he dreamed of Jeremiah. The prophet said little. He placed a hand on Jonathan's forehead and whispered, "The blood of the righteous cries out from the ground, and the just one is listening. Guard the temple until the word returns in flesh." At dawn, Jonathan awoke. He summoned the priests and commanded, "No grave of the righteous shall be defiled. Those who died for the law are not dead." From that day on, the tombs of the Maccabee martyrs were treated as sacred ground. Pilgrims came not to mourn, but to receive courage. The sick touched the soil and were healed. The fearful stood among the 7 graves and felt their hearts filled like vessels. Some dreamed of themselves in Judah's armor, holding a sword lit with fire. The tale spread far. Jewish communities in Egypt, Babylon, and across the Mediterranean began copying 2 Maccabees, hiding it in clay jars, passing it down through generations. But before long, those books were banned, because those in power grew afraid of a people who no longer feared death, who would not be erased, who believed that God would one day call them each by name on the morning of resurrection. Such a people could not be conquered. Time passed, empires fell, but some names remained. Judah, the martyrs, the mother, and their belief quietly, unshakably flowed into the bloodstream of Christian history. When Peter was crucified, he remembered the Maccabee sons. When Paul wrote of glorified bodies, he remembered the buried prophecy. And when the first Christians were burned alive in Rome, they did not scream. They sang, "You promised resurrection, and your word never fails. The Maccabees were not just a revolt. They were a foreshadowing, a prelude to the gospel of resurrection. Without them, those who died without ever seeing the Messiah there may have been no one willing to believe in a man who rose after 3 days. So when you bow your head in prayer, when you place your hand on your chest in the dark, when fear whispers that death is the end, remember, there are those who died and still live, and they wait for you, beyond the temple, beyond the tomb, beyond the promise. Most people think the story of the Maccabees was only about Judah and a revolt in Jerusalem. But few know that far away, in Egypt, God also moved not through soldiers, but through elephants, angels, and the reversal of fate. 3rd Maccabees, a book forgotten, sealed off from the Western Bible, does not tell of swords, does not tell of military triumph. It tells of a political purge and a miracle at the heart of Alexandria. It began during the reign of Ptolemy IV Philopator, king of Egypt. After defeating Antiochus III in a great battle, Ptolemy did not thank his own gods. He looked instead to Jerusalem, and like many tyrants before him, he wanted to step where no one was ever allowed into the heart of the temple. He stood before the Eternal One and felt no fear. He walked forward into the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest could enter, once a year. But before his foot touched the threshold, he collapsed. They say a paralysis ran down his spine. His eyes rolled white. His mouth hissed like a snake struck at the neck. No one touched him. No one struck him. Only the hand of the one he did not believe in pressing lightly against his forehead. He was carried out like a corpse, and when he awoke, shame twisted into rage, not just against the Jews in Judea, but against the tens of thousands living peacefully in Egypt. He issued a decree. All Jews in Egypt were to be seized, branded, and brought to the great square of Alexandria. There, they would be trampled to death by war elephants. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Pharaoh did the same to Hebrew infants. Nebuchadnezzar did the same to those who refused to bow. Now, Ptolemy turned against a people who would bow to no one but the Lord. When they were gathered in Alexandria, they did not scream. They did not fight. They knelt. No weapons, no leader. Only prayer, spoken in ancient Hebrew before an empire that understood nothing but power. They fasted. They scattered ashes on their heads. They did not beg for life. They asked God to remember his covenant with Abraham. The night before the execution, Ptolemy, drunk on wine, ordered the elephants brought forth. The first beast roared, crushing the stone beneath it. Reins pulled tight. The scent of blood hung in the air. But when it was whipped forward, it turned. Suddenly, as if some unseen thread snapped the entire herd, nearly 500 elephants turned back. They stampeded through the Egyptian soldiers. They went mad, screamed like creatures being burned alive. The execution square became a battlefield of its own design. Not a single Jew was harmed. No one understood it. Except them. They knew. God had moved. The next morning, Ptolemy awoke to chaos. Guards dead, captives alive, and rain falling from a sky with no explanation. In his dreams, he had seen a man in white, a sword of fire in hand, standing in the heavens. He said nothing, only looked, and Ptolemy knew if he took one more wrong step, his soul would have no refuge. He revoked the execution, issued a decree. The Jews are free to worship. He gave them rewards, allowed them to rebuild their synagogues, and swore never to touch the temple again. Not because he had changed, but because he now knew. The God they served is not silent. 3rd Maccabees does not end in military conquest. It ends in divine victory. No sword, no blood, no general. Only faith and a people willing to die if they must. And that is what made God act. Some battles you do not fight. You simply stand. Some miracles do not come with radiant angels, but through elephants turned by the will of a god, even they must obey. And if you find yourself in your own Alexandria pressed into corners, with no way out, no voice heard, remember, God once turned an army of elephants. Shall he not turn your fate as well? Imagine this. You hold a genealogy etched with the names of your ancestors, those who died to keep the promise. And one day, someone comes, quietly tears out a few pages, and says to you, that part doesn't matter. That is what happened to the Maccabees. When the smoke of Alexandria cleared, when Jerusalem's temple burned once more with holy fire, it seemed the story had found its place in history. But in truth, a new battle had begun not with swords, but with pens. First Maccabees, second, third, even fourth, though not part of canon. One by one, they were stripped from the Western Bible, not because they were theologically false, not because they lacked historical grounding, but because they were too dangerous. Look closely. In First Maccabees, the people rise, not waiting for a Messiah, not needing prophets, only armed with faith and ancestral memory. In Second Maccabees, they die, not for vague hope, but in absolute belief that they will rise again in flesh, in blood, in soul. In Third Maccabees, there is no army, no prophet, no sword, only prayer, only standing still, and a miracle unfolds. Now ask yourself, would an empire that wants people quiet, waiting for salvation someday but never acting, dare to keep such pages? Would a religion that seeks to control martyrdom, resurrection, righteousness tolerate a mother who watched her sons die for the old law? Would a church built on fear and curated belief leave untouched a set of souls that refused to bow even in death? And so the Maccabees were downgraded, called apocrypha, labeled historical curiosities, erased from most Western Bibles by the 16th century. Only Ethiopia, a land that never knelt to Rome, kept them in its canon. And there, the story never faded. But here's the strange thing. Even in deletion, the spirit of the Maccabees bled into the roots of Christianity. The idea of resurrection, no longer vague in Daniel, became central in Paul. Martyrdom, no longer a tragedy, became triumph. And the image of a mother offering her child to God became the shadow of Mary at Golgotha. So we must ask, are the Maccabees the unacknowledged origin, the unseen bones of our belief? Perhaps, or perhaps, they are the prophecy still unfolding. Because today, in a world where faith is commodified, religion weaponized, and people bow more easily to power than to promise, we need the Maccabees more than ever. Not to wage war, but to remember what we've forgotten. That faith is not a feeling. It is a choice, even if it costs everything. That the Word of God is not just bound in gold-leafed books, but in the blood of those who died to keep it whole. And that, if you've ever wanted to give up, ever wanted to kneel because you had no strength to stand, then remember, there were mothers who watched their children die and still stood upright. So if you are still searching for a miracle, maybe you don't have to wait anymore. Maybe the miracle is that you're alive to read these words, that their blood still moves through your soul, that the vow was never broken. We will not bow, even if our blood stains the law of God. And if you're still here, perhaps your soul has just been touched in the deepest place. At Tales of Black, every story is a reminder. Some memories are not found in books, but in blood. If this story moved something in you, share it with someone else who's lost. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. And if there's a legend, a memory, or a haunting you need to hear told, leave it in the comments. Perhaps your story will be the next to rise from the ashes. If you're still here, Thank you not just for watching until the end, but for walking with us on this journey to awaken a forgotten truth at Tales of Black. We don't tell stories for shock value. We tell them to remember, to reclaim, and to honor the spiritual legacies the world tried to erase. Truth wasn't lost, it was erased. Now we remember. Disclaimer: all content is created for educational, cultural, and storytelling purposes only. We do not promote hate, racism, or religious bias. This channel encourages open thought, respectful dialogue, and the honoring of sacred histories that have long been ignored. If something in this story stirred your spirit, please like, share, subscribe, and leave us a comment below. Your voice might just inspire the next story we tell. We truly hope you'll join us for the stories still to come.